What's up, drum and bass producers? I'm Max from Futureproof Music School, and today we're diving into the world of REESE Basses sound design. Our instructor, Quannum Logic, is about to reveal the secrets behind this game-changing sound. If you want to check out the whole course on drum and bass and over 30 hours of other music production content, head over to futureproofmusicschool.com and start your free 7-day trial today.
Okay, so next up, I want to start talking about bass, which is obviously the other most important element in drum and bass. Throughout every subgenre of drum and bass, there's a few commonalities that all the basses will share. And those are going to be punchy, heavy subs or drop subs or 808 style basses that really kind of punch and crunch. And probably the most iconic bass of all drum and bass basses, the REESE bass. We're going to look at the REESE bass in depth here in a bit. But to start out, we're going to look at a little background on what the REESE bass is, where it came from, and why it became so prominent in drum and bass, and what constitutes a REESE bass. So even if you're new to drum and bass, you've probably heard of a REESE bass. It's kind of become a byword for a sustained sawtooth type bass. However, proper REESes have one commonality along them, and that is the fact that there is phase beating that accelerates as the bass gets higher in pitch. Now, the reason I would say a proper REESe, for an explanation of why I use the term proper REESe, we're going to look at a little bit of history for just a minute. So the first appearance of the REESE bass, as we know it, was in 1988. A producer named Kevin Saunderson, who was using the artist name at the time, REESE, put out a song called Just Want Another Chance. He made a bass on it that was on a Casio CZ series phase distortion synthesizer, something that was a budget version of a Yamaha DX7 that Casio had put out at the time, used their version of FM synthesis known as phase distortion synthesis. And he made this bass on there using two oscillators slightly detuned from each other that created this very interesting bass that no one had ever heard before. And that sounds like this. So that's the reason nowadays that it's called the REESE bass, is because REESE, Just Want Another Chance, was its first appearance. Now, its first permeation into drum and bass, and really what brought it to the forefront after that song, was a producer called Ray Keith, had heard that song, really liked the bass, figured out how to program it himself, and in 1994 put out the song under his name at the time, Renegade, and the song was called Terrorist. And this is the first appearance of the REESE bass in drum and bass back in 1994. And that sounds like... So essentially from there, that tune was an absolute smash, and the REESE bass started being used over and over and over again in different permutations and different varieties all throughout drum and bass, and that continues to this day. So it's why I want to look at it first and get a little understanding of how a basic REESE is made. So for that, we're going to be using Vital. You can use literally any synthesizer that has basic shape oscillator waveforms, because all you need is a pair of saws. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to set the voicing to mono. I'm going to add glide a little bit. Now this is obviously optional, but this is something I always like to add in. Gives it a nice little bit of character. Then I'll show you two different ways of making it. You can do it within one oscillator if the synth has unison, but we're going to open up Vital here. We're going to start with a basic saw wave and just going to have this pattern looping. So to make it from a basic single saw wave to a REESE, we're going to add a second saw wave. And let's make them so that it really just starts right on top of each other by turning the phase randomization down. So they start at the exact same point. It just sounds like a louder version of the single saw oscillator. So to turn it from just a stacked saw oscillator to a REESE, all we got to do is start using the fine detune to detune one of the saws. So you can now hear how you're getting that phase beating that I'm talking about. So if I hold a sustained note low, as we go up in pitch, that phase beating, which is the cancellation between the offset pitch of those two saw waves, there are certain points where as the detuned parts of each other cross over in phase, that they are going to cancel each other out. And that's what you're hearing with that beating, that wub, 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 wub. That's actually phase cancellation caused by 280-degree out of phase points within the waveform. Well, the traditional sounding Reese is just two detuned saw waves. You can really make it with any shape you want. We'll do two squared sines. Let's do it with a triangle. Even make it with a square wave. But I like using saws because it gives you all of the harmonics available to work with. Because you can turn that saw into essentially anything. You can have your filtered out low pass Reese. You can have your screaming. You can even have your notched out Reese. So the next one I'll look at is I'm going to show you how to make it with just a single oscillator. It does the same effect. So as I said, there's a lot of different ways to go about this, but the two most basic ways is that double oscillator, slightly detuning one. The next one is we're going to take a single oscillator. We're going to put the unison voices up to 2. We're going to go into the advanced tab here in unison and turn everything to mono. So there is no stereo spread on the unison. And then we just detune it until we get the unison detune down. We just turn the unison detune down until we get the exact amount of beating we want. Now you can increase or decrease the amount of phase beating just by detuning it slightly more from each other. So as you can hear, the amount of detune affects how fast and how rapidly it beats. And that also is why when you go up the keyboard, because it's happening, it's oscillating faster, it's going to detune faster. That is the quintessential Reese bass. And it's an important one to know and to understand how to use in drum and bass because you see it absolutely everywhere. So its usefulness in all sorts of different styles, subgenres, etc., can't be overstated. You'll hear it in liquid drum and bass as a much more low-pass version. You'll hear it in heavy, hard neurofunk drum and bass as either big, raw, burly Reeses. You'll hear it a lot in neurofunk as filtered shots. And really everywhere. there's not a subgenre of drum and bass that doesn't use the REESE bass at some point. So when we start to dive in and look at REESE bass basic processing, which we've looked at, and we'll start to look at some more advanced techniques, I'll show you a little sauce, and we'll dive into that a bit more.